Boardroom Bound, Episode 124, Governance Through the Eyes of a Boardroom Pioneer, with Zane.
And I guess that's the major insight I would give to others, and that is don't be afraid of risk. If you don't take risks, you can be good, but I'm not sure you'll ever be great at using all the skills you'll ever need. But it definitely got me noticed, and it definitely was hard, I'll tell you that.
Hello, and welcome to this episode of Boardroom Bound. My name is Alexander Lowry, and this is the podcast dedicated to intentional leadership in the boardroom. My goal is to give aspiring and existing directors the tips, tactics, and strategies necessary to transform your confidence and build a successful career as a board director. Quick reminder, you can get all of today's show notes at podcast.gordon.edu. And in today's episode, we're speaking with Zane. Ellen is someone who had a brilliant healthcare career. CEO of several major organizations, and that translated directly over into the boardroom, not by her own doing, but by people chasing after her because she had such a great reputation. You're going to love this. You're not going to believe the stories about how all these came about and what that means for you, and you will find the best example you've probably ever heard of how someone landed a board seat on today's show. You're not going to want to miss this. Let's jump into the episode. Zane, welcome to the Boardroom Bound podcast.
Well, thank you, Alexander. I'm delighted to be with you.
Well, I will say before this started, so I'm up near Boston, and people are listening all over the world, but I was connecting with different people, talking about different guests, and your name came up from 5 different people. They're going, well, you're obviously in Boston and you do board stuff. Well, you must know Ellen. Everybody up there knows Ellen from the board stuff. And it was very clear. I needed to know Ellen for the board stuff. And when I got to know Ellen, I realized my audience needs to know Ellen from all the board stuff you do. So your resume is incredibly impressive. There's so much for us to get into today. And I would love if we could start with a little bit for our audience, because you are probably the one LinkedIn profile person we've ever had on here before who's never bothered to do anything really on your LinkedIn profile. I think that's probably fair. Everybody else spends a lot of time on it. So no one's going to understand it for my audience if they just went there. So maybe you could tell us a little bit of the story about how it started.
In terms of my career in general?
Yeah.
Yeah, so I've been in healthcare for many, many years, but I had a very traditional trajectory within my career because in the 80s it really wasn't all that typical for a woman to become the CEO of anything. Mm-hmm. So my first CEO opportunity came at Quincy Hospital, which is about 20 minutes south of Boston, and it was a municipal hospital owned by the city of Quincy and managed by Hospital Corporation of America, HCA. So my paycheck actually came from Nashville, where HCA is headquartered. And I was, if you will, the hired gun to manage this municipal hospital that had 8 days of cash. Wow. And 7 or 8 collective bargaining units. So it was wall-to-wall unionized, and it had almost no cash, and nobody but a woman who was looking to break into leadership would have ever taken that job.
But what a great platform, right?
It turned out to be one of the best things I ever did, but it was a huge risk. And I guess that's the major insight I would give to others, and that is don't be afraid of risk. If you don't take risks, you can be good, but I'm not sure you'll ever be great at using all the skills you'll ever need. But it definitely got me noticed, and it definitely was hard, I'll tell you that.
Okay, so they had 8 days of cash, and after you spent a lot of time, they had a few more days of cash than that. Where did the story grow from there?
Out of the blue one day, after I was CEO for about 4 years, I got a call out of the blue from a wonderful man by the name of H. Richard Nesson, Dr. Nesson, who at the time was the CEO at Brigham and Women's Hospital, one of the premier Harvard teaching hospitals in Boston. And he was the founding CEO of what was then Partners Healthcare, which was a merger between Mass General Hospital and Brigham and Women's Hospital. And he said to me, we have a vision to build a vast network of physicians and hospitals throughout eastern Massachusetts, and we need a leader, and we've been watching, and we think you've got the skills that it will take. And he asked me to come have lunch with him, and the punchline is I went and stayed 10 years and had a remarkable experience at Partners Healthcare, which is today known as Mass General Brigham. And then, out of the blue, I got another call from a wonderful man by the name of Larry Bacow. And at the time, Larry was the president of Tufts University. Today, Larry is the president of Harvard University. But in 2003, Larry called and said that Tufts Medical Center had just come out of a failed merger with another system in Rhode Island. And they needed a CEO as they were independent again, and asked if I would take a leap and leave a very successful system from the Harvard system at Partners and come to Tufts to do a turnaround once again at Tufts Medical Center. So not being risk averse, I did, and it was the best thing and the best place I ever worked.
Now, during this time, Ellen, so there's a lot going on for you, and you're building a position of authority. You're clearly building a brand that people know about this. Had any of the board work started before you'd gone to Tufts?
No, I was the CEO at Tufts for about 6 years, I think, before I got the first call for a public company board seat.
And was it on your radar, though? Was it something you were thinking about, or was that a phone call out of the blue as well?
It was not something I was thinking about. There was so much work in my day job that there was just no way I could have thought about it. But a trustee at Tufts University came to me and said he was the lead director at a clinical research organization in the pharma industry and asked me if I was interested. And I researched it and took the leap and was very glad I did. It was the beginning of my public company experience.
And so let's talk a little bit what this is like for our audience, because many people can understand being in the C-suite, what that looks like and feels like, and delivering and making things happen. And so you land in your first board seat, and it can be a shock for many people, sort of the nose in, fingers out transition. What was it like for you? What did you learn from that?
Very important question, because as a member of a board, one is a member of a team. As a CEO, the buck stops with you. Mm-hmm. And after consulting all the good people around you, you are accountable for making the final decision. I always say as to whether or not we turn left or we turn right. But as a board member, it's consultative, and it is understanding the difference between governance of an organization and the operations of an organization. And I believe one has to proactively sit in those meetings and think about that all the time, because it is nose in, fingers out. That's absolutely true. And it's a conscious discussion with one every step of the way, especially at the beginning.
All right, so Ellen, you've landed your first board seat. It sounds like you liked the taste of it, and you're thinking maybe a little bit more of this. Now, most of this stuff had been coming to you, and clearly you'd done the right work for it to come and find you. So I don't want to make it sound anything other than that. Was there a time in this board opportunity mindset where you thought, okay, I might want to be a portfolio person, I might want a second one? When did the proactivity kick in, and what did that look like?
What actually happened is while I was working full-time, I pretty much was involved with one public company and a couple of private companies, private equity backed. When I gave notice that I was stepping down as CEO at Tufts Medical Center, it was February of 2011, and I indicated I would be stepping down in October of 2011. And to my utter shock, I got a lot of calls. And the issue for me, luckily, was that there was a significant demand for women who had been CEOs in healthcare. So it was a sweet spot that I hadn't quite expected or really even thought about. So once I finally did step down in October, I spent my first 6 months in quote-unquote retirement, which my husband would say is a big lie. But nonetheless, I was flying around the country looking at all these different boards, telling folks that I couldn't do them all, and then decided on 3. So for me, it was an opportunity where most of them were looking for women who who had been executives in healthcare, and I was very fortunate from that point of view.
So this is a wonderful opportunity to explain due diligence to our audience, because it's something that's incredibly hard to do, but so important to get right, because you want to put yourself in a position to succeed and where you can add value to the organization. And the story that you're telling is unlike what I would imagine just about anybody else is going to get to do, that sort of picking and choosing, unless if we go back to, say, when Sarbanes-Oxley came into effect and they needed to get these sort of accounting experts to run the audit committees. Maybe that's a parallel to it. But Ellen, tell us what it was like for you. How are you going about it? What's the best practice guidance that you'd give other people if they're even just considering the one board, the right way to go about checking it out?
It's a wonderful question, because people should not jump at just any opportunity, because it is good to get a first opportunity, and your first opportunity will not be the one that has all the bells and whistles that you'd hope. But you really need to do your due diligence. And I think too many people underestimate the importance of board culture. And is the board rubber stamp? Does the board have a relationship with the CEO such that it's very respectful of the CEO, the management, and each other on the board, but at the same time is probing and takes their responsibility seriously? And I would never take a position on a board if I didn't have the opportunity to dialogue with each and every person on that board, as well as the CEO and maybe one or two other senior executives like the CFO, and very often the business development person or the general counsel. Understanding what the skeletons are in the closet, pending litigation, issues that ISS and Glass Lewis, who really overlook how boards function from a peer standpoint. So you want to know the good, the bad, and the ugly. I wouldn't be afraid of the tough stuff, because that's what makes these boards exciting and interesting. But one has the responsibility to know what one is getting into.
And that can be hard to do. And obviously there's different, say, situations between public versus private, right? We know with a public company, a lot more is out there and you can find it, but it's still incumbent upon you to do the right thing. And it can be so hard if you're not actually in the room seeing the dialogue. And I know, for example, and maybe this was part of your due diligence, maybe not, but I know, for example, in Synchrony Financial, you were a non-voting board observer for a period of time. Was that an intentional strategy to do as part of your due diligence? How did that work?
Yes, it was. And fortunately for me, Synchrony is a board. Synchrony Financial was the former GE Capital. And after GE spun off GE Capital, it became Synchrony. And they had, predating me by far, a wonderful corporate culture. And they often did that with their new directors, to have everybody get to know everybody else in a way where you hadn't yet formally committed. And it really gets you in the room, and you get to see and hear a lot. And I think it's an excellent opportunity, more than anything else, to see how the directors interact with each other and with management. So, again, it goes back to culture. It's really, really important.
And so, Ellen, you have a vast number of different boards. You've been on lots of different experiences. Clearly, you're also bringing people onto the boards that you are sitting on now, and you're having those conversations and you're vetting them. Let's put that hat on for the perspective of you're chatting with a prospective board member, and you're also looking for, are there any red flags that we're going to bring on? I would love your thoughts on this scenario. Here's what a new public company board member told me about the first board seat they landed in this space. And they said they brought in 3 finalists. We were all very different. One was a finance person, one was a marketing person, and one was a tech person. And when we found that out, the 3 of us all thought they have no idea what they want. And she got the opportunity. And what she learned later was they knew exactly what they wanted. They needed all 3 of those, but they had 1 seat available. They thought all these 3 finalists are all absolutely perfect, but we need to figure out which is the best fit for the culture. We'll take that one first. And when the next seat opens up, we'll probably go back to try to find one of these 2 skill sets. I would love your thoughts. Do you think that's the right way for a board to go about something like that? Does culture really trump everything?
Culture trumps everything. Now that doesn't mean to diminish the technical expertise, But having said that, I chair the governance committee now today at Haemonetics Corporation. And we are looking for new director right now as we speak. And as a board, we talked about the gap analysis that we felt we had in terms of who's going to be retiring within the next few years, what skill sets are we going to lose, and what do we need given the strategic plan for the company going forward. And we had a bucket A, bucket B, and bucket C, and we thought about that. We prioritized. In this particular search, we're using a recruiter, and we went to the recruiter and told our recruiter what we were looking for. So it takes the committee and then the whole board to sit down and really agree about what you're looking for so that there's nobody off the track when it comes time to extend an offer.
Now, Ellen, let's help our audience understand a bit more about, say, the NomGov committee work. So if we go back a couple of decades, right, it was maybe the CEO was playing golf with some buddies and said, I need a new board member. You want to join, John? You in for this? You good?
Yeah.
You're okay? Good. Great. All right. Come on down.
Yeah.
And then, then you'd hear that ripping sound at the start of the board meeting where John's just going to open the pack when he walks into the room. Okay. So we go forward today, and we don't hear that anymore, right? Because first of all, it's on the iPad, right? Anyway, but
right.
We go forward today, and there's a clear intentionality because you've already stressed how important board culture is. But my perspective would be you would still want maybe all of the entire board, but certainly on the committee thinking, who are people that we already know, we can vouch for, we can trust, and we'll give those names to the recruiter that we're working with to consider them and put them in a pool and vet them. And some people would think, oh, you're just giving it over to the recruiter, you give them the spec and off they go. Tell us what it's been like for your experience.
Well, I want to tell you a really interesting story about one of my boards, and it was the board of Boston Scientific. I was sitting at a board meeting of another company, and we decided in the board meeting to take a bio break. So we all got up, and my colleague was walking over to the men's room, and I was walking over to the ladies' room, and he said to me, "Hey, Ellen, we were talking about you yesterday at Boston Scientific. We have an opening. Are you interested?" Well, Boston Scientific is a phenomenal company, and I said, "Of course I'm interested, but I'm just about full." And I had one spot open, and I was seriously thinking about a particular company. So this fellow said, "Don't do anything." He went back to the board meeting, wrote to the chair of the board and said, "We better hurry up." The next morning, there was a limo at my home to take me to Boston to meet the board chair and founder of Boston Scientific, then to take me to Marlborough, Massachusetts, where the company is headquartered. And in 72 hours, it was done. So I always say to folks, that happened on a bio break. So never underestimate how important an informal conversation can be. That is a very unusual situation,
right.
And I tell people to not be despondent. If a board search can take a year to 18 months, that is not any indicator of how the board considers you, but it is really more of a process in situation most of the time.
And part of that delay at a public company could just be where you are, say, in the proxy season and them wanting to go through the right timing. So it can stretch out for a variety of reasons. It doesn't necessarily indicate anything in specificness. But you've been on a range of different organization types, from public and private and others. Do you feel like and maybe this is unfair because if you join a board, you're going to bring your experience and perspective to bear because that's the best practice that you know. Do you see that all boards should be heading down this same sort of path in their hiring process, or do you think different strokes for different folks?
I think different strokes for different folks. Recruiters will tell you, and I may get this number wrong, but it's directionally correct, that only 25 or 30% of all board positions are found through a recruiter, and most of them are found through networking. So for people who are working right now, you can't forget you have a day job. But by the same token, going to programs, going to educational offerings, you just never know who you're sitting next to. It's a little bit like my bio break story. And so I think networking is indeed a very important. My first board, a trustee at Tufts University, heard me give a presentation to the board of trustees at the university, and because he'd seen me and knew me, he came up to me. And that isn't atypical about how this happens.
Well, I will say the board networking space, I always find a breath of fresh air compared to, say, C-suite executive networking space. I remember being at the board, NACD's National Association of Corporate Directors Summit a year ago when it was actually still live. I was there as one of the speakers. I was at one of the events talking to someone, and I thought I'd recognized him from something. And we were having a great conversation. He was asking all about what I want to do, what boards I was looking at. And I walked away thinking, I've got to figure out who this guy is. I know him from somewhere. He had been the CEO of Kellogg and could not have been more humble, more relaxed, couldn't have been on more impressive boards already, but just wanted to hear about other people. And that's what he was there to do, to connect with. And I really enjoyed that. But clearly there are good ways and bad ways to do networking. And Ellen, I'm sure you've had some people that have reached out and have sort of done things, you go, we could have done it a little differently. That might be not be the best way to go. I'd love if you'd sort of give some guidance and perspective. People going, okay, I heard what Ellen said. I've got to go out and figure out how I network. That sounds really hard to some people. How would you recommend people do it?
Well, as you mentioned, NACD, the National Association of Corporate Directors, they have a lot of really good educational opportunities nationally. The New England chapter happens to be very active, and in the non-COVID days, there'd be many opportunities to go to a breakfast or a lunch or a program and meet fascinating people. It is that kind of networking. I think I mentioned to you that I actually run a course at the Harvard School of Public Health, and the name of the course is Women on Boards, Getting On and Adding Value. And it's a day-and-a-half course that I run on behalf of the School of Public Health. And it's a great way for people to get an overview of what board life is like. Everything from what your bio should look like, to what your compensation should look like, to what happens in a crisis, et cetera. So people need to think about getting out there and meeting others who can help direct them and tell them when they need deeper education in a particular area.
And Ellen, there's clearly a core set of, let's call them, tools that people have to have in order to go forward. So there's probably the bio and the resume and certain things like that they have to get ready to go. But let's talk about something that maybe is a little more nebulous to some people. But I would argue, you talked about how phone calls were coming out of the blue or introductions were coming out of the blue. You weren't seeking them. But I would argue you'd been laying the seeds for a long time. You'd done some really great work where clearly your profile was rising within the industry. So people knew about you. And if you talk to executive recruiters, they say, that's our job, to know who the stars are and to be able to go and find them. When we talk to people and they tell us those names. So I would argue there are no generalists in a boardroom. No one's hiring you to come and learn on the fly, and you're a great person who'll just pick things up quickly. You need to bring something to the party. Now, you're running a NomGov committee. You're thinking about that. When you think about people that are trying to sort of build up their reputation and brand, right? You can publish articles, you can speak at conferences. I guess they're all virtual these days. Things that would get someone on your radar. What sort of things come to mind?
Well, you've named a couple of them. Public speaking is very good, and all people are not created equal when it comes to that. And to understand how to speak with different groups in such a way that what you say is memorable and thoughtful and clear is very important, because it was that trustee at Tufts University that heard me give a speech that came to me. So you need to be very clear, concise, not talk too much, not talk too little, and having that balance, understanding what your listeners need versus what you want to say, is very, very important. And the higher you go, the more important your ability to communicate like that will become. I've met too many people along the way that say things like, I'm getting ready to retire. I think what I'd like to do is do a couple of boards. Never say that to anybody. The fact is, this isn't about what you'd like to do primarily. It's about what the companies need. And one has to go in a mindset to say, I am not all things to all people. There are many companies on whose boards I should not sit because I can't add value. And it depends what the company is and what they need at that moment in time. Interestingly enough, Alexander, one of my early boards was a semiconductor company. I'm still on that board, Brooks Automation, in Chelmsford, Mass. They are a semiconductor company. And I remember saying to the CEO, I don't know anything about semiconductors. Why would you want me for this board? And he said, Ellen, we've got engineers here. We don't need you to bring industry expertise on semiconductors. What I need is someone who has managed a very large workforce because I don't have another CEO on my board right now. And I need someone who understands what the role I'm going through as the CEO is. So every board needs something different at different times.
You're going exactly where I was thinking, because when I look at your sort of board arc, if I can call it that, there are different sorts of buckets, and people might say it's by industry or different ways you want to cut it. So for example, we've already talked about Synchrony Fiduciary Trust Company is another. There's some people that go like, that's financial services. That's not necessarily a fit. You're a healthcare person. But if we come back to that board composition matrix, which is the way I would describe what you talked about before for your nom-gov committee, of there are different types of needs that we have. And you can think about it could be by industry, it could be by skill set, by CEO, etc. And finding the ways that those ideally plug in, and hopefully it's multiple things that are fit, of course the board culture too, and that's the way it works. So Ellen, if we agree that sort of makes sense, and the problem for some people is, well, it's not like all these roles are posted. I can go out and say like, oh, look, I checked these couple of them. That's good, and that's how it fits. And at the same point, we talked about you have that brand and reputation that you could be going for a bio break, and someone says, oh, let's talk about a board role, right? So that's great. There's sort of a middle ground for people to build their reputation in a way that gets it out there for people to know. We talked about going to different types of events. Clearly, being someone who does excellent work is good, but people have to know you do that excellent work. And I'm sure you've seen people who write to you because you're running the nom-gov, and they're like, Ellen, please know about my candidacy. And I imagine you go, that's probably what I need you to do, not what I need you to do. What's the right way for people to be building sort of the long-term sticky relationship so that they are known when the opportunity comes up?
I wish I had a single silver bullet on that, but I don't. And it's a combination, and I think it's the confluence and it's luck. So if someone is very good at what they do, let's take, for example, compliance. Today, the areas of risk and compliance are hot. And if someone can make sure that in their industry they are well known because they have either done a very good job, worked for a great company, or developed expertise, and then network reasonably, and then public speak, and then meet other people at conferences, I believe it's a confluence of all of those things with a little bit of luck. And letting the recruiters know that you're out there, not being a pest, but touching base with them every so often, particularly when something about your background has changed or been enhanced.
And Ellen, we've seen the world change quite a bit. And you and I were joking before the show started how maybe it's great not to be running the healthcare systems during the crisis that we've seen. And I'm sure that's exacerbating or perhaps fast-tracking some of the trends that we've seen. So I would argue like chief HR officers, people are recognizing maybe we need more of that thinking into the board space. And we know we'd seen cyber going that way. And I'm sure you'd tell us about some of the tech changes and how complicated it's getting in healthcare today. When you think about the boards that you're on, the spaces that you're playing in, when you pull out the crystal ball and you start looking towards the future, what do you see coming down the road that people should be aware of?
In terms of the expertise that is sought after?
Yeah.
So I'm seeing definite trends. So you mentioned 8 human resources officers, and I can tell you when I first started, there was almost no appetite for anyone in what was the classic HR. That is changing, particularly if people have global HR experience. There's a significant increase for folks to understand what the challenges are for a global HR officer. Anything in the area of diversity and equity and inclusion, there's a lot more focus and interest there. More interest in marketing because people are always trying to think of innovative ways to make sure their services and products become known. And I didn't see that so much when I first started. It was everybody had to be a CEO, or if not, maybe a CFO or a COO. That is changing. in order to get in the trenches, on the ground experience with people who are actually much closer to the issue. I will tell you, a number of lawyers have come to me and have said, I have great governance experience. I understand compliance. I understand all how boards should function. And I will tell you, I don't see that being highly sought after right now, because these public companies in particular say to themselves, we can buy that if we need it. So people need to think about, what is it that differentiates them? So, for example, I have a colleague who is a lawyer, but has great experience with Title IX, sexual assault, that kind of thing, and she is sought after. But just because someone has good governance experience, I'm not seeing that with the same rigor I used to.
That makes sense. And Ellen, the other thing I'd love to touch on, if we could just spend a few minutes on, so you are now, I would call a professional board director. You have this amazing portfolio of opportunities. And you talked about a story before of someone said, I'm going to retire and I think I'd like to have that sort of thing. What's that actually like? Because in some ways, your life must be programmed several years in advance. All the board meetings are plugged in, trying to make it all function and work.
Mm-hmm. It definitely is. It's boards now, because everybody's in competition for dates for board meetings, whether it's Zoom or real. So my calendar is full through 2022, and people are starting to think about board dates in 2023. So this is a commitment. When people do board service, it is not ancillary. It is a commitment, and it's serious, and people have to be ready to do that given their lifestyle. If they're not, that's okay. They just shouldn't do it.
But clearly also great fun. That would be why you've got so many of these opportunities. You clearly enjoy and get the most out of it. And if you were going to maybe sort of wrap it up with some parting words of encouragement and advice for people thinking, I think I want to go in this space. Clearly you've been successful in the C-suite side, and now you're really enjoying the opportunity of being in a boardroom. What thoughts would you give?
The type of people who serve on boards are typically people who have a thirst for learning and for learning something new, really new. And the idea of sitting on the boards of a financial services company, of a semiconductor company, it is wonderful how it expands your thinking, and you simply hope you can give as much value back. But the people you meet, the backgrounds of these people, and the subject matter, even for the challenging and difficult stuff, is so fascinating that it frankly juices me up, because it's so invigorating. So to me, what I get out of it is feeling quite alive in dealing with pertinent, important things that I would never have otherwise been exposed to. So, for example, running a major academic medical center, I knew nothing about the issues with the global workforce. I knew nothing about what foreign exchange can do to a balance sheet. These were all very new things that I found to be fascinating.
Well, Ellen, I think you've given us lots of stories today that most of us are going to find fascinating, especially we now all have to ascribe to have the story like you do for how we land on a board during a bio break. I haven't heard anybody top that one yet, so that's the new challenge. So we were delighted to have you on the show today. Thank you for sharing your insights and helping all of us to be boardroom bound.
Well, thank you. It was a lot of fun.
That's it for this episode of Boardroom Bound. I really enjoyed chatting with Ellen Zane. This is someone who has a lot of stories from the boardroom, and they're all great, and clearly showed how doing an excellent job and building up your reputation around it can lead to other people knowing how you specifically could fit into their organizations. Some great stories in there that just show doing well can lead to good things, but you have to have people know about it, right? And clearly had communicated that value well, and others could see it. Now remember, if you head over to podcast.gordon.edu, you will find links to everything we talked about today. And please know that the Boardroom Bound team and I are so proud to be your go-to podcast for all things that connect, prepare, and empower you to land a board seat. Be sure to subscribe to this podcast so you don't miss any of the high-quality content that we're bringing to you every Wednesday. Thanks for joining me today. I can't wait to share more stories and strategies from brilliant business minds with you again next week. Remember to keep tuning in to be Boardroom Bound.